I'm Jim, the Monday Man. This is part two in our series about Monday formulas. In part one, we did the basics. We looked at editing and creating formulas. We looked a little bit at the math and string functions that are available, how to format numbers a little bit, and also the basics on logical functions. In this video, I'm going to specifically look at tips that I use when I am constructing my formulas and trying to debug them. Sometimes it can be very challenging, and these are the things that I use, the tricks that I use that help me get that done. So let's get started. All right, number one, let's say I'm in here editing this formula. I've worked on this quite a bit and I decide that I've got it. It's all figured out. I hit set formula and I have a critical error. Now I need to go check something. Now in this particular case, I know exactly what I did, but let's say I didn't. But I don't want to lose this, and there's no way it will let me save it with that critical error. So what I can do is just do a Control A to select everything, Control C to copy, and then I can jump over to my favorite text editor, Word in this case, and do a Control V, and now I've saved the text that I have. So at the very least, I can get back to where I was when I ran into the error. And now I can start trying to figure out what happened. And but I won't lose all of the other work that I did. The next thing is that with regard to being able to read things, spaces and carriage returns don't matter. So I can insert them anywhere I want. Generally speaking, what I do is I put a space before and after each operator, like that. And then also after each comma that is separating a value. That way I get a little bit more readability and it spaces things out, and it is less likely to separate where I have column names like this one that have a space in there. So it will be less likely to break on that space. I can do carriage returns as well. Now in this particular formula, I happen to know that somewhere around here, right here, is a major break in the logic of the formula. So I might do something like that just to separate those out. And then it will help me in debugging that. And I'll show you another trick later on when you have major breaks like this to help figure things out. So I added some spaces, I added some carriage returns, and now I hit set formula, and it's still exactly the same values that I'm getting returned. So there's no difference in that, and it can really help with the readability. Now it is important to note that with regard to spacing, anything inside, like right here, where I have leave date, leave space date is the name of a column. If I put a space in there, obviously that's going to break it. Same thing with the carriage return. And what's really dangerous about those is sometimes you have a situation where it will break. For example, right here, there's the editor is breaking there, and it's because there's a space. But I can't see any difference between what is currently there and if I hit enter and delete the space. It looks exactly the same. And so you do need to be careful there. Also, inside quotes, anything that you do inside quotes is relevant, of course. So you can't put spacing or carriage returns inside there unless you actually want them. The next thing that's related to that, I'm going to simplify this formula significantly. I'm basically going to take it out, and I'm just going to put quote A, 3 quotes or 4, whatever I typed there, B, and close. I'm going to also, just for good measure, add, let's do it this way. I'll do a carriage return and then a C. And so basically we have A, some spaces, B, a carriage return, and a C, right? So we set this and we get back A space B space C. So what is actually shown is it's being trimmed. So all extra spaces are removed and all carriage returns are removed when you're looking at a function value. Now, if you do have a situation where you want to actually have these spaces occur between the A and the B, and you want to be able to display them, what you can do is insert what is called a non-breaking space. In OS X on the Apples, if you do command space, that will insert a non-breaking space, and on Windows machines, you can hold down the Alt key and then type 255, and that will give you a non-breaking space. Now, what I do is if I do need that, I enter it once, do a Control C, and then paste it as many times as I need. And then I can delete those out. Now, there is no way in Monday Formulas to actually display a carriage return or a line feed. So that we're kind of stuck on. But let's now set this. And you can see now that it used that non-breaking space to actually show additional spaces there. The next thing I want to discuss is what to do if you actually want to include quote characters or single quotes or double quotes inside a string. This could be in several situations where you might want that. What I have found to be the easiest, you can use what is called escaping, or you do a backslash and then the character that you want, for example, the quote mark. But what I have found to be the simplest and most consistent is if I want to include, let's say that I want to say just hello, but I want it to be in quotes. If I do this, I don't see the quote marks because it's using those quotes as a designator to say that this is a string. Now, if I do that, I don't get what I want. So what I have found to be the easiest is to use single quotes or double quotes and use the opposite to specify the string of what you want. Let me show you. Okay, so if I use a single quote here and then the double quote where I want it, and then I close with the same type that I started with, which is a single quote in this case, I get the hello with double quotes around it. And vice versa, if I want single quotes there, I can start and end with double quotes and then put the single quotes on the inside. And that works very easily. I have found that to be the most consistent when you're trying to reference quote marks in a string that you want to keep. That's the easiest way. Now, let's talk about protecting your formulas. It doesn't happen very often, and I have found that the recent improvement in the editor has helped, but it is possible for someone to accidentally come in here and do something that changes your formula in a way that you are not expecting, and now it's broken. And if you have a simple formula, that's probably not that big a deal. But in the case where it's a very complex formula, that can really it can make your Monday bad. Okay, so what I have found is that in most cases, the default board permissions is set to everybody can edit everything. And this is almost always not the best way, in my opinion. If you change it to edit content, you can have your board owners that can change column values, change columns, add columns, delete columns. They can change formulas, etc. But then everybody else who's using that board, who doesn't really need that can now do everything they need to do, update their values and add items and all that. But they won't be able to change things that are a little bit more protected, like column values. And that includes formulas. So once you have that set to edit content, now it's going to be less likely. The only people that can then come in here and make a change are board owners. So that's one thing. The other thing that I've found that can be helpful, and in this case, well, let's go to a more complicated formula. So this is a very complex formula. I would be bummed if somebody came in and deleted that or changed it and broke it. This took a while to get it working, so I wouldn't want to do that. So what you can do, another protection mechanism you can use, of course you can save this somewhere and just keep record of it, but another easy way is to copy that and then come in here and paste it into the description, the column description. So paste that in there, and now you have basically a backup, if you will, of what that formula is. So if somebody comes in here and accidentally makes a change, you can come in here, select your description text, and come back in here now and paste it in there, and you're all back, good to go. The next thing I want to talk about is the community group. Oftentimes, if you're running into trouble, it can be very helpful to put the problem that you're having out into the universe and see if someone else can help you. There's a lot of reasons that can be very helpful. And one thing is that there's some smart people out there. So I'm going to give you an example. So here's someone who asked a question about formulas, and I want to show you, though, a very specific problem that occurs. The editor of the community group has a tendency to change quote marks. When you type them in and you use regular double quotes, it changes them to smart quotes, and they're not very smart, in my opinion, but this is a very simple formula. I'm going to just paste it, and I have position defined in my is a column on my board, and so I'm going to set formula, and I get an error. And I come back in here and I look at this and I go, well, okay, column name equals lab manager, comma, everything looks good, right? The problem is that these quote marks are not real quote marks. They're smart quotes. And if we change them back to regular quotes, then everything will be happy. So now I can save the formula and it works. Okay, so what do we do? One is to be aware of the problem. The second thing is, if when you are replying and posting things on the community group, if you use this pre-formatted text function in the editor, you can type whatever you want, and I'm just going to paste that exact same thing. I'm going to fix the quotes. I'm going to try to fix the quotes. Comma, geez Louise. All right, there we go. Okay, I'm going to fix the quotes. Quote, and one more. All right, quote lab. Okay, so now I've got this correct. And if I get out of this, because this is an old, you notice that these quotes are looking good. They're fine. Now, if I take that same thing, this is the one where I fixed it, and so it's good. And I'm gonna copy that and paste it out here. It's converted those now. I don't know if you can see this, but it is converted those into those smart quotes again. And so if someone tried to copy and paste this now, it would fail. So if you use the pre-formatted text feature, or the way I do it, instead of selecting that button, which is just as easy, but I use the that little symbol right there, which is attached to the tilde. And it's a reverse apostrophe. I don't know. I don't know what it's called. Anyway, so if you use that and then you put whatever text you want inside of those, you will get this block that is pre-formatted text that doesn't make those changes. Okay, so this next issue is dividing by 0. So obviously that's not okay, and so we get an error when we try to do it. The common way to deal with this is to do this, where we check to see if the value that we're wanting to use is not equal to 0. Then we do that. Otherwise, we return something else. And we'll just, in this case, use an empty string, which is double quotes. So we set the formula and we still get the error. So the problem here is that even though we don't need this portion of the formula, it's still being evaluated and this returning an error. So the way to deal with this is to force, there's two ways. One way is to force this to always be valid. So we're not needing it if it's equal to 0, but we can force it to always be valid by saying if hours is not equal to 0, comma, hours. So if it's not equal to 0, hours, otherwise, and we just need a value that's not equal to 0. So we'll do 1. So set formula, and now it works. So that's one way to do it. The other way is just an oddity of the way the formula evaluator works. And that is that divide doesn't have that same problem. It does not get evaluated unless it's needed. So if we have 1 comma hours, close, and then we'll just delete the rest of this here. And we said that works. So there's two ways to address the divide by 0 issue. All right, now there are other functions that have the same issue. And one example of that is given here. So if we use the function days to get the number of days between two dates, that works if the date ended is valid. But if it's not there, then it returns an error when we use this portion here on the second side. So I'm going to simplify this formula just to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. So we're going to take out this part and we'll just say 1. Okay, so if the date ended is null, then 1. Otherwise, we want the days between the date ended and the date started. But if it's equal to 0, we have to put in a value. So we put in that value, otherwise we use the actual value. Okay, so we can use that and that works. Now if we remove this portion here and we take out the if statement and we always use the value that we want in the first place. Okay, delete that. So we have days ended and started, and we set the formula here. Where is, okay, so ended, we don't have an ended value, and so we're getting an error on this now. And if we set this to a value, then it works. But if we return this back to the way we had it, and we say if ended does not equal quote quote, comma, ended, otherwise anything that's a valid date. All right, and I need to close that parentheses. Missing, what did I do? Ended, and oh, I got too many. Okay, so now we don't have that problem, even if it doesn't exist. So I mentioned that sometimes if you run into a problem and you have a critical error that won't let you save the function, you can use a text editor to save it, basically. So another thing you can do in a complicated function like this one, actually let's use This is a great example, but it's a little too complicated. So let's use this function right here. So this is long. It's not super complicated, but it is a little bit. And if we need help figuring out some of the details, and we have basically here a nested set of if statements. And so if we copy that and we come over to our favorite editor and we paste that in there, we can have some additional flexibility and visibility with regard to being able to figure out what's going on. Now we know this is a valid statement because we were able to save it. But if we come in here and add some carriage returns there, I'm going to do some additional editing and I'll come back to that. Okay, magically reappears and it's all awesome now. So here what I did is I put carriage returns in to designate the differences between the ends of each of the statements. And then also you can use the indents instead of tabs to help clarify where functions start and end. So basically at each level, I'm using an indent function, the increase and the decrease. So I can just click those and it can sometimes give a lot of clarity as to what's going on in your formula. Now, we don't have the assistance of being able to get the function names. We can't get the column name values, but if you have something and you're trying to figure out exactly what's going on, this can be helpful sometimes. Okay, so in that case, we were talking about nested ifs. And in some cases, you cannot get around it. You have to use nested ifs. But in some cases, you don't have to do that. Now, and that's what I want to look at right now. So in this particular example, if type, which is a status column, is a particular value, then I want to use this function. If it's not that, then I want to use a different function. So here we have times 100, hours times 100. Here we have hours times 150, and then we have an additional. Okay. Now, there's no reason inherently in what we're doing that the nested ifs are required. And what we can do instead of nesting them this way, which in this case is not that bad, but again, if as your formulas get more complicated, you can use some of these tricks to make it easier on yourself. So here, instead of having this, we're returning a numeric value, right? So if it's equal to SEO, then we want this formula. If we just say, I want that to be 0 otherwise, then we can, and I'm going to put an inner there to help clarify what I'm doing. I'm going to add that to whatever the next one is. So in that case, if type equals design, then I use hours times 150. Otherwise, I want it to be 0. Then I'm going to add, if type equals programming hours, then hours or equals programming is hours times 85. Otherwise, it's going to be 0. Close, plus, and then we have our last condition here. If type equals project management, then it's going to be hours times 150. And if it's not that, we want it to be 0 again. So this piece here at the end, we can just delete. We don't have a bunch of parentheses where we have to figure out exactly how many there are. So if you have situations where they are mutually exclusive and you're returning numbers, if you just use zeros where you want it to not be counted, and then you add all of those up, it makes your statements, your function statement, much simpler, and it gives you exactly the same value. Now, we have, in some cases, the exact same type of logic with regard to text. So in this formula, I'm doing the same kind of thing where if position, which is a status column, equals lab manager, then I want to return manager. If the position equals area supervisor, then it also returns manager. Okay, so we have a number of these different things, and it's going to be either one of them or none of them, but it will never be more than one. And so we can do the same kind of thing that we did with our number logic, and instead of returning a 0, we just return a null string, which is quote quote. So we'll close that, and I'm doing it a little mixed up here, but that's okay. So if it equals lab manager, then return manager, otherwise quote quote. Now here, instead of using a plus to string things together when they're strings, we want to use the concatenate function or the concatenate operator, and that is an ampersand. So we can just put that in there. We'll do it this way. We'll add that space. So if it's area supervisor, then return manager, otherwise quote quote, and then we'll do that again. Now on this one, I'm going to hit enter and then put it there so I can have a little bit of clarity. And again, if this is a little bit confusing visually, we can add some additional spaces in there, spaces or carriage returns, and that doesn't affect the functionality at all. So we'll do quote quote, and we have office. Okay, so we got 2 more here. Well, 1.5, and this one I already did. So there you go. So now we are stringing these together, and we're adding things that are basically returning empty strings when it's not that situation. And we're stringing all of those together into one group, and then we get the same value as we would have if we had those nested ifs. So now let's take it one more step and talk about dealing with very complicated functions. Now this isn't the most complicated I've ever seen, but it is certainly up there. So, and I mentioned this earlier, what this does is calculates the number of vacation days allotted to a particular employee based on their tenure when they start, and if they're leaving, that as well. So, okay, this took a while for me to figure out how to do all this. So one thing you can do as you're putting these together and thinking about all of the different pieces is you can start, and I'm just gonna cut. So take that out, set the formula. So you take them in pieces. And in some cases, and in this one in particular, I actually started with multiple formula columns. So I had a first part and I had a second part. And then once I got both of those working, I put them together. So you get this first part working, that's still fairly complicated. And then you just add back in your second part or copy that from the other formula column that you have. Okay, so that's one thing that can help you is having basically sub formulas. And thankfully in Monday's formulas, you can reference formulas inside of formulas. And so that works very well sometimes. The other thing is on this particular function, I have 2 main pieces. Basically what this is from the first part of the year up through their anniversary date, we have one calculation. And then the second part of the year, anything after their anniversary date has another part. And so we have to consider those separately because they get additional years or additional days based on the number of years that they are with the company. So you have these 2 pieces, and I actually did have this occurrence come up. Now, if in this particular case, I'd already done my formula, something wasn't working exactly right, and I'm getting one value, and so that can be a little bit confusing. So I came back in here and I wanted to see what the different pieces were. And so what I did is I put a parentheses around the first part just to make sure that this is separated. So we have this first part And then we have the second part. Now, in this particular case, the second part is fine. The first part needed the parentheses, but all I did was add some parentheses to clarify the operations, and I didn't change anything. So the values came out the same, right? So now I can additionally, I could cut this out and do the evaluation and put this into another column if I wanted. But here's another trick. And you can do this in much more complicated ways. But if you have operators for different pieces of a function like this, and this is a great example. So basically take whatever is here, and I want to treat that as a string. In Monday formulas, numbers will, when needed, automatically convert to strings. So we're going to treat that first part like a string, and I'm going to combine that with, and then I'm going to do a quote, and I'm going to include a space just for clarity and another space, close quote. So this operator is no longer a real mathematical operator. It's just a string. It's just a text. And then I'm going to put another concatenate operator there, and I'm going to save this. So now I get two values. This one is hard to read because it's off. Okay, so I get two values with the plus sign in. So I can see what is happening in each part of the formula. And I don't remember exactly what was going on with this particular formula, but I actually did use this to help give me some clarity as to what was going on. And you can, of course, use this in other places as well. So if I wanted, for example, I mean, it doesn't make sense to, do that with this, but if I needed to, I could do the same kind of thing where I put parentheses around one group and then just do the concatenate, the operator, and then concatenate. Now, this doesn't always lend itself because sometimes the formulas are so complicated that it becomes difficult to separate the numeric functions from the strings. But in this case, it worked very well. So there you go. Hope you found that video interesting and helpful. If you did, please hit the like button. If you have not yet subscribed, please do that and then hit the bell icon to be notified of future videos. If there's anything in particular you would like for me to cover in future videos, put that in the comments. And that's it. Thanks for joining us. Till next time, I'm Jim, the Monday Man.